everyone, and welcome to the Supports and Accommodations video series. This is the video for supports for students with hearing impairments on our state assessments. My name is Jen Paul. I'm the English learner and the Accessibility Assessment Specialist at the Michigan Department of Education. What we're going to do today is review our Supports and Accommodations framework. We'll talk about how you go about selecting appropriate supports and accommodations for your students who might be deaf or hard of hearing. And within doing that, we will be reviewing many of the high-use supports and accommodations for that particular student group. Big ideas for our framework and things to keep in mind as you organize and make decisions about what is best for students on state tests. Very first thing is please make sure that you are making team-based decisions. Make those individual student decisions for what a student needs and don't make blanket decisions for enabling things within the insight testing system or approving supports and accommodations across the board for any of the other state tests. We really need to focus on what it is that the student actually needs at the time of the assessment that is going to be very specific to their instructional needs primarily. What is it that the student is using in their day-to-day classroom experience? We want to make sure that those two things line up absolutely as much as possible. If you're not already aware of the framework itself, the terms that we use to talk about our supports and accommodations are as follows. We have a category of tools called universal tools. These are things that are going to be available to all students, and the use of those universal tools is primarily student-driven. An example of this would be a highlighter. So a student would have access to an embedded highlighter, let's say within an online testing platform, and the decision to use that highlighter is totally dependent on whether or not the student wants to use it. Dropping down from that is our designated supports category. These are supports that only are going to be available to students who have a specific need. And how do you know who those students are? This is going to be something that is determined at the local level, and it's going to be primarily educator driven. So a team of educators or whoever it is that the student is working with the most is going to be making that decision about what's best for the student. And of course, including hopefully the student in those discussions as well. And as I already mentioned, it should be matching up with what the student is experiencing to the degree possible within their everyday classroom experience. The last category is what we call accommodations. This is a very narrow set of supports for students that are only things that are available if they are a student with disabilities or have a 504 plan, and if they have a need for that accommodation identified in their IEP or 504 plan. An example of an accommodation would be Braille. It's not the case that every student with disabilities needs Braille. However, their IEP is most certainly going to be defining the fact that the student needs Braille as a particular support for that student. Our office, the Office of Educational Assessment and Accountability, does actually monitor supports and accommodations use. What we're really interested in making sure that districts are not doing is over-accommodating students. So giving too much to students that don't really need it, because that can actually have a negative impact for students. So what happens if we flag or identify a district? Those districts are then placed on one of our OEAA assessment monitoring lists. And we would be following up with the district to find out more about what their processes and procedures are related to making those decisions, and then helping in ways that we can so that, again, we're not over-accommodating students. I want to point everyone to some important resources that we have on our web pages. One of the most important documents that you should be aware of is the Supports and Accommodations Guidance document. You can find this on any of the supports, any of the assessment web pages, in fact, under the Supports and Accommodations section on that page. Specific to this video is a guide that is relevant for M-STEP test takers. We have a M-STEP guide for teachers of students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Another great reference for things related to the WIDA assessments is the WIDA Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. So go out to the websites, see what resources we have available, download these and anything else that you think you might need. Let's talk about how you go about enabling supports and accommodations for students. For M-STEP, there is no application process that you need to engage in prior to enabling a universal tool, designated support, or accommodation in the Insight testing platform. So we don't need to approve anything for a student in advance. We're assuming that you are making good decisions about what's best for the student, about what they actually need. However, with that said, some of those designated supports and accommodations actually have to be enabled by somebody. Some person at the local level needs to be in charge of turning those things on for a student so that they actually do have access to them within the assessment system at the time of the assessment. My access is very similar. There's no application process. There are a few things that do need to be enabled in advance of a student test experience. For PSAT, there is an application process that educators must engage in. You do that through what is called an SSD system that is managed by College Board. For ACT, there's no application process. Again, you order what materials you might need. For WIDA, again, there's no application process. However, similar to M-STEP and My Access, some embedded accommodations must actually be turned on by someone manually at the local level. For the purposes of our video today, when you see this symbol, the circle with the plus sign in it, this is going to indicate that the designated support or accommodation must be displayed, or excuse me, must be enabled in the online test management system. All of this information that I'm going to be sharing with you today is available in the Supports and Accommodations Guidance document that is available on our web pages. So who are our students that are going to be taking our statewide assessments? We know that many of them have auditory processing disorders. They also have a variety of other things that they are tackling that impact their instruction. They may have conductive, sensorineural, and mixed. Things that might be helpful for students as they are taking the M-STEP assessment, if they are deaf or hard of hearing. Our M-STEP assessments are untimed, so this should help students who may have literacy concerns and are perhaps reading at a pace at which they really do need more time. So just know that M-STEP tests are certainly untimed. For some of your students, they do need a video sign language option. We have a option, video sign language, that's available as an accommodation, that's available for math. So every single question will have a embedded video within the online testing engine itself that's available for, as I just said, every single math question. For English language arts, students would have access to a video that they can play for the listening passage, because there are listening items on the M-STEP ELA test that connect to a listening passage. So students would be able to engage with the content of the assessment by watching the VSL video. And then, as I just mentioned, it's not just the passage that has a video, but every single question has an associated video with it that goes with the listening passage. So let me say that one more time, just so I'm clear. Only questions that are associated with a listening passage have a video, and the listening passages themselves have a video. So it's not the case that every single question on the ELA test has a video. It's just a small set of those particular questions. And you should know that providing ASL for any other questions outside of those listening passages and questions connected to the listening passage is going to be an invalid accommodation. We're really trying to assess students' literacy abilities within the context of the English Language Arts assessment. That's why there's not a video available for every single question on that assessment. Students can replay the videos as many times as they would like, so there's no limit on that. They can rewatch them. If there's a particular sign that they're not familiar with, they can ask for clarification on what that sign means, as long as there's not a lengthy discussion about the usage of the term within the context of the question. So you can't help a student. You could get into a situation where you might be helping a student too much, is what I'm trying to say. However, if you want to clarify what the sign is for the student with another sign that they are more familiar with, that's certainly something that is allowable. You do have the ability to provide for students an in-person signer or interpreter. This can be very helpful for students that are younger, who have difficulties that might be involving fine motor skills. This could be helpful for students who have a strong need to have the test administered by someone with whom they're familiar. So know that that is certainly an option for your M-STEP assessments. With the exception, of course, of, and I'm gonna clarify this in just a second, but with the exception of a few things and a few places, this is certainly an allowable accommodation. So when can you do this exactly? You can do this for math, science, and social studies M-STEP. You can sign all the test directions, test questions, and the answer options if a student needs it. For science and social studies, it's preferable that the students take the paper pencil test so the interpreter can actually use the reader script that could accompany that paper pencil assessment. Now, for English Language Arts, this is where you have to pay attention. You can only sign directions, and again, the content from the listening passages and the questions and answer options related to the listening passage itself. Questions without listening passages cannot be signed to students. Doing so would invalidate the test question and the test. So basically just what I mentioned and reviewed with you for the VSL holds true if you're going to use an in-person signer or interpreter with a student as well. It's possible that you might have some students who could benefit from using text-to-speech and text-to-speech passage. This is, again, certainly allowable. There's more information about the text-to-speech option and text-to-speech passage option found in the video related to text-to-speech. For the M-STEP, again, you could have an in-person reader. So if you don't want to use the text-to-speech option, you could have someone reading aloud to the student. So again, this is different from a signer or interpreter. This is someone who's going to be reading aloud the test content to the student. This is going to be helpful for students who might need lip reading as an option and strongly need to have the test administered by someone with whom they are familiar. It's also very possible that some students might have a difficult time understanding the synthesized voice produced by the online system's text-to-speech. So the text-to-speech option, and I'm not going to cover this in depth in this video, but the text-to-speech option is not a human voice. It is a synthesized voice of very high quality, but it's still a synthesized voice. And so again, an in-person reader might be a good option if that synthesized voice is not going to be appropriate for a particular student. The in-person human reader is available for math or ELA, online or paper pencil, but it must be administered in a one-on-one setting for the online test. The reason for that is because the test questions are going to be different for every single student. So if you're in a scenario where the student is taking the CAT assessment, the student, you could have, let's say, 10 students in a room or 20 students. All 20 students would be looking at different questions, even though they might all be on question 3, let's say. Well, reading aloud to one student is certainly going to be a distraction for other students that might be in that classroom. So that's why if you're going to do that, then it should be administered separately with that student, just so that you're not creating other distractions for students in that test experience. If you're going to do the in-person human reader option, whoever's doing the test administration and actually doing the reading aloud must use what are called the read aloud guidelines, which are found in the supports and accommodations guidance document. So the read aloud guidelines is not a script, but it does provide guidance on how to say certain words, phrases, signs, symbols related to the content that is in the assessments. You can also do this for science and social studies, but this can only be administered paper pencil, and the test administrator must actually use the reader script. So there's no guidelines per se. We actually give you the script to read from. Some of your students might benefit from closed captioning. Closed captioning is only available on the listening portion of the English Language Arts assessment. Why? Because it's only necessary for content that the student does not have access to visually on the screen, which would be the listening passages themselves. Students can replay that closed captioning as many times as they'd like. And if you'd like to try these things out, if you want to see what closed captioning looks like, if you want to see what the embedded video sign language looks like, you can try these things out through the OTTs. That's what we call them. Online Tools Training. And if you go out to the M-STEP assessment, you can find more information about the OTTs on that webpage. Let's talk about My Access. We'll switch gears. Video sign language is not provided. The majority of our students taking this assessment who use ASL or Signed Exact English do not have experience with video sign language and are used to a finite number of sign language interpreters. So that's the primary reason why we do not have VSL available at this current time. We do want to encourage schools to make sure that they're using interpreters with students that those students are actually familiar with and use during their instructional day. This helps to ensure that the students are being assessed in the content and not their understanding of the interpreter. So you can use an in-person interpreter that provides the student content in ASL or Signed Exact English. You can use that with directions or the clarification of directions for students. You can use that for the functional independence ELA listening items. And for any content that is allowed to be read to students. There are some exceptions to that. Within the My Access assessments, there are items that are labeled and indicated as do not read aloud. And those items cannot be, therefore, signed in any way, whether it's ASL or signed exact English for the student. If the student is a functional reader, they are not required to have content read to them. The only items that would require the sign interpretation, if that is how spoken language is accessed for the student, are the listening items on the functional independence ELA accessing print and using language assessment. For P and SI, participation and supported independence. Sign language interpretation should mirror what and how it is used for instructional purposes for the student. Test administrators and signers or interpreters must follow those do not read aloud tables in the front of the assessment booklets to determine what should not be communicated via sign, or what is essentially the same thing as what cannot be read aloud to a student. Again, we're going to switch gears and talk briefly about SAT and ACT work keys. Please refer to the College Board and ACT documentation for additional information on what is allowable and how to apply for accommodations if they are necessary for a particular student. WIDA Access and the WIDA Alternate Access for ELLs does have some accommodations that could be helpful for students. They do allow for audio aids as a universal tool. That would be things like amplification devices, noise buffers, white noise machines. These things can be used for all domains. We would allow something like that for MSTEP as well, and just keep that in mind. If students are taking the online or paper pencil WIDA Access for ELLs assessment, directions can be provided in ASL by a human signer. So the directions can be signed for all 4 domains: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. However, signing cannot be provided as an accommodation for the listening and speaking domains. In those cases, if that is the student's primary mode of communication for listening and speaking, that's the point at which what you would do is request a WIDA test exception. A WIDA test exception request can be submitted through the OEAA secure site. We have a guidance document on our www.michigan.gov/WIDA page about how you would apply for a test exception. For WIDA, again, you can use an in-person human reader for online or paper pencil, listening, speaking, and writing. However, that is not available for reading. And again, the reason for that is because they're trying to assess a student's literacy abilities. For a paper pencil administration, the human reader accommodation script must be ordered from DRC by contacting DRC directly. The script actually is a substitute for the listening and speaking CD. Repeat in-person human reader. This is available for students taking the listening, speaking, or writing domains, not available for reading. This just allows the in-person human reader to repeat audio or whatever audio or oral stimulus is being provided to the students. Repeat item audio. This allows the students to hear the recorded audio a second time. It's available online for paper pencil listening, speaking, and writing, but not available for reading. This is one that gets utilized quite heavily by educators. And I'm just going to caution folks to make sure that they understand that this is an accommodation with a capital A. So it's not the case that this should be enabled for all of your students who are English learners. This is only going to be available to students who have an IEP or 504 plan and whose IEP or 504 plan suggests that they have a need for repeating audio stimulus. Manual control of item audio is another option. This could be helpful for students who need additional language processing time. So there are listening components, surprisingly enough, for listening, speaking, and writing. This allows the students to control when they are ready to hear recorded audio during the test, instead of the audio playing automatically as the student moves through the test itself. The test will, once you get to a new screen, it'll start playing audio immediately. This would let the student actually kind of slow that down a little bit, not slowing down the audio itself, but just get prepared for when they hear the audio, which again could be very helpful for those students who need that additional language processing time, or just additional time to kind of get situated and be ready for the audio when it's played. So what do I put in the IEP? This is a typical question. Do I need to include universal tools and designated supports on an IEP? The reason to include a universal tool or designated support on the IEP is to ensure that the student gets what they need. So the student should, on their IEP, the IEP should really be describing what the student needs and how those needs are addressed, regardless of the type of support that it gets called for the assessments. So if the student needs a highlighter, let's say, bad example, but let's say that a student needs a highlighter, for example. They need it. They absolutely need it. It doesn't matter that we've called it a universal tool. If they need it and it's related to whatever their disability is, then it probably should be in their IEP somewhere. So again, I just want to point folks to a number of resources that we have available, such as that supports and accommodations guidance document. And just so you know, we also have a number of other supports and accommodations recording and tracking resources to help you stay organized and get things coordinated at the district level so that you have everything prepared at the time of the assessments. And if after watching the video today you have additional questions, please make sure you send them to mde-oeaa@michigan.gov. Thank you so much.